San Francisco, a November night, the kind of rain that doesn't commit to anything, just hangs in the air and blurs the lights. The Fairmont Hotel rises above it all, 32 floors of marble and money, and the particular silence of a building that has hosted 1,000 evenings exactly like this one. Inside, the grand ballroom glitters, crystal, white linen, 300 people who have spent their lives deciding who belongs and who doesn't. The room is full, the wine is flowing. The conversations are the kind that move billions of dollars without ever saying so directly. Nobody notices the man who arrives alone. No entourage, no announcement, dark suit, visible rank. He moves through the room quietly, shaking hands, listening more than speaking, watching everything. He finds his table, sits down, and somewhere across the ballroom, a woman in a green dress sets down her champagne glass. She has noticed him, and she has already decided something. The glass in her hand is still full. For now. The Fairmont Hotel San Francisco, 8:47 p.m. The wine hit him at 8:47 p.m. in front of 300 people. And he didn't move. That's the part nobody could explain afterward. Not the wine itself. Not the words that came before it. The part that stayed with people, the part that got replayed in slow motion on every platform by morning, was the 5 seconds after. Darius Holt sitting perfectly still, red wine running down the side of his face, dripping from his jaw onto the white tablecloth below. His hands flat on the table, his back straight, his expression carrying nothing that the woman standing over him could use. 5 seconds. Then he reached into his breast pocket, produced a folded white handkerchief, opened it, and began to pat his face. Methodical, unhurried, like he was finishing a thought he'd been in the middle of. 300 people held their breath. He looked up at the woman, not angry, not devastated, not performing composure for anyone watching, just looked.
"Thank you, Mrs.
Barrow, he said, quiet enough that it was almost only for her. You just answered every question I came here with. Then he set the handkerchief on the table, folded it once, turned back to the officials on either side of him, and continued the conversation as if a minor and unremarkable thing had just occurred. Which, in the only accounting that mattered to him, it had. 12 hours earlier, none of this existed yet. 12 hours earlier, it was still just an evening. Black sedan. Outside the Fairmont Hotel, 6:53 p.m. Darius arrived at 6:53. Not because he was early, because he needed 7 minutes. 7 minutes to sit in the back of a black sedan outside the Fairmont and remind himself what he was there for. The rain came down soft, not hard enough to ruin anything, just enough to blur the lights. Leon Pruitt sat in the front seat, quiet. He'd worked alongside Darius long enough to know when the general needed silence and when he needed conversation. Tonight was silence. The hotel entrance glowed ahead, valets moved in and out, women in floor-length gowns, men in suits that cost more than some people's rent. Laughter drifting through glass doors every time someone walked in or out. Darius watched all of it from behind tinted windows. He was not in uniform, that was the point. Dark suit, no stars, no ribbons, no rank visible anywhere. Just a man in a well-cut jacket, sitting in the back of a car, watching money move in the rain. Leon finally spoke. Low, careful. You sure about this, sir? Darius watched a valet take keys from a couple near the entrance. The man barely looked at the valet. The woman didn't look at all. I'm sure, Darius said, about what I need to find out. He opened the door, stepped into the light rain, didn't hurry. 7 years ago, the Defense Innovation Unit had been a footnote, a small office inside the Pentagon that nobody with real authority took seriously. Now it controlled $48 billion in annual contracts. Technology procurement, drone systems, cyber defense, the architecture of how America would fight its next wars. Darius Holt ran it. Not in name. His official title was Deputy Director of Strategic Acquisitions, which was long and impressive and told you almost nothing useful. But in practice, every major technology contract that moved through the Pentagon in the past 3 years carried his signature. Or didn't move at all. He was 51 years old, Detroit-born, raised by his mother in a 2-bedroom house on the east side where the heat sometimes went out in January. He'd learned early that the world did not automatically make room for you. You made your own room, or you stood in the hallway. He'd enlisted at 18, earned his commission in the field, climbed for 28 years up a structure where certain rungs were simply simping for the people who looked like him. Bronze Star, 2 Purple Hearts, Things he didn't mention at dinner parties because he didn't go to dinner parties, and if he had, he still wouldn't have mentioned them. Tonight, he was going to sit quietly in a ballroom, eat whatever they served, and watch how Barrow defense systems behaved when they believed nobody consequential was paying attention. In the elevator, Leon stood beside him and spoke without looking at him. Barrow Defense Systems, 68 years in the industry. Graham Barrow is the current CEO, 52. Inherited the company through his marriage to Celeste 11 years ago. The company was already losing ground. He stabilized it. A pause. Celeste Barrow is 48, daughter of Congressman Everett Shaw. The Shaws founded the company originally. Celeste has no official role, but she's present at every event, every introduction, every dinner where something real gets decided. The complaints, Darius said. 3 internal HR complaints in the past 18 months. 2 separate departments, different employees, same pattern of behavior documented in each one. Resolved how? Settled, quietly, without changes to personnel, policy, or anything structural. Leon paused. Graham Barrow signed the approval on each settlement. The elevator stopped. Darius adjusted his jacket. So tonight is a character audit, Darius said. Not a social call. Doors opened. He stepped forward. The Fairmont Ballroom, 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. The ballroom was exactly what you'd expect from an event that charged $1,000 a plate. Crystal chandeliers. White tablecloths pressed to a crease. Flowers arranged by someone whose entire job was the arrangement of flowers for rooms like this. The kind of space built to make certain people feel they'd arrived, and everyone else feel they'd wandered through the wrong entrance. Darius felt neither. He'd spent 20 years in rooms designed to communicate hierarchy, Senate hearing rooms, Pentagon briefing spaces, situation rooms where the song decision cost lives and the right one saved them. A ballroom with good floral arrangements registered somewhere below all of that on his internal scale. He moved through the crowd slowly, shook hands with Colonel Patricia Hayes from Pentagon personnel, who was near the bar and looked relieved to see a face she recognized. Spent 4 minutes with 2 DIU officials he'd worked with on a previous procurement review. Accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server and thanked the man after reading his name badge. Small habits his mother had taught him. How you treat someone who can't do anything for you tells everyone in the room who you actually are. He'd believed it at 18. He believed it more at 51. He found his table, table 12, center of the VIP section. He sat down, placed the napkin in his lap, and began the work he'd come to do. He watched. Celeste Barrow arrived at 7:19. You knew before you saw her. The temperature in a section of the room shifted. Nearby conversations reorganized themselves, heads turned by instinct. She was tall, fair-haired, the kind of woman who had spent decades perfecting the performance of effortless. The dress was dark green. The jewelry was real. The smile had been calibrated over a lifetime of rooms exactly like this one. Her husband walked beside her. Graham Barrow. Broader in the shoulders than you'd expect for someone who'd spent his career in boardrooms. Tired around the eyes in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. He held her elbow lightly, steered her through the crowd with the practiced efficiency of a man who had spent years managing the immediate effects of his wife's presence. Darius watched them cross the room. Then he watched Celeste alone, because Celeste was working. Not networking, there was a difference. Networking was mutual. What Celeste did was closer to inspection. Moving through the room, filing people into categories she'd been maintaining her whole adult life. Worth attention. Not worth attention. Worth a smile. Worth a half smile. Worth a glance and nothing more. In the first 4 minutes, she spoke to 3 people. 2 of them brightened visibly. 1 contracted. Darius noted which one. The first moment that mattered happened before dinner was served. A server, young man, dark suit, carrying a tray of champagne, stepped into Celeste's path near the dining room entrance. Nothing spilled, nothing broke. The young man stepped back immediately and apologized before she said anything. Celeste looked at him. Not the look you give someone you've forgiven for a minor inconvenience. The other look, the one that takes 2 seconds and communicates a very long paragraph about where someone sits in the order of things. Then she turned back to her conversation and continued mid-sentence. The young man stood there for a moment, then moved on. Darius picked up his water glass. The second moment happened 20 minutes later. A woman near the silent auction table tried to introduce herself to Celeste. Mid-40s. Professional presentation. She'd prepared something to say, extended her hand. Celeste shook it, briefly. Was already looking past her before the handshake finished. Said something with a smile attached to it. Moved on. The woman stood with her hand still slightly extended, then lowered it. The third moment happened at Celeste's own table. Her friend Sandra leaned close, and Celeste said something near her ear, and Sandra laughed the way people laugh at something they know they shouldn't find funny. Not the laugh itself, the shape of it. The guilty pleasure of being included in a judgment. Darius couldn't hear the words from across the room. He didn't need the words. He'd seen that laugh his entire career. He knew exactly what it meant and what it cost the person it was about. He also watched Graham. That was important. Because Graham wasn't oblivious. That was the precise and uncomfortable truth of it. He saw the moment with the server, saw the handshake that ended before it started, saw the whispered exchange and Sandra's guilty response. And he did what he had apparently been doing for a very long time. He turned back to his own conversation and continued. Not ignorance, not distraction, a choice. Made quickly, smoothly. The way you make a choice you've made so many times it no longer registers as a choice. Just a reflex, just the path of least resistance dressed up as nothing at all. Darius filed that away beside everything else. By 8 o'clock, the ballroom had reached its full temperature. The noise of 300 people who had been drinking champagne for an hour settled into something warm and continuous. Darius was in conversation with 2 DIUs when he felt it. Not heard, felt. The shift in a room when someone decides something. He looked up without making it obvious. Scanned left, Celeste Barrow, standing at her table, wine glass in hand. Looking directly at him. Not the way you look at someone you recognize. The way you look at something that doesn't fit. The way you look at a problem you've decided to address before someone else notices it needs addressing. Leon appeared at his shoulder. Barely audible. Sir, I see her. Should I? Stay where you are. Leon moved back. Darius returned to his conversation. But he tracked Celeste in the edge of his vision, watched her say something to Sandra, watched Sandra's reaction, a small social wince, smoothed over immediately. Watched Celeste set her wine glass on the table with the deliberate care of someone who has made a decision and is now executing it. She began moving toward his table, directly. In 28 years, Darius Holt had walked toward things other people stepped away from. Enemy positions, congressional hearings, rooms full of people who had already made their decision about him before he opened his mouth. He'd learned one thing from all of it. You don't run from what's coming towards you. You let it arrive. And then you find out what it actually is. The Fairmont Ballroom, table 12, 8:30 p.m. to 8:52 p.m. She stopped at the edge of his table. Close enough to make it a confrontation, far enough to make it look like concern. Excuse me, social voice. Smooth from decades of saying difficult things in pleasant tones. I think there may have been some confusion with tonight's seating arrangements. The officials on their side of Darius looked up. Colonel Hayes to his left had gone slightly pale. Darius set down his fork. Picked up his water glass. Took a slow sip. He said nothing yet. I'm Celeste Barrow, as if that explained everything. Barrow Defense Systems. We've been partners with the Department of Defense for nearly 7 decades. I know who you are, Darius said. Just that. She blinked reset. She hadn't expected him to know her name, or maybe she had and it didn't shift anything for her. The VIP section is typically reserved for established contractors and senior military leadership. I was assigned to table 12, he said, by the Defense Innovation Unit. I'm sure there's been a clerical error. Still smiling, still smooth. These events are large. These things happen. There was no error. The smoothness developed its first crack. She looked at the officials on either side of him. At the Pentagon credentials. Back at Darius. And you're here representing which contractor? I'm not representing a contractor. A program, then. Which initiative? I'm here in my capacity with the Defense Innovation Unit. Something moved across her face. Fast. Gone before you could name it. She knew what the DIU was. Everyone in that room knew. They also knew what the DIU controlled and who ran it. But the math wasn't adding up. because the math required her to see him clearly, and she had already decided, before she walked across the room, before the evening started, who he was and why he was there. She had carried that decision in from the parking structure. The math was not going to add up. "I see," she said, voice cooling now, something shifting beneath it. "And what qualifies you for that capacity exactly?" Colonel Hayes spoke carefully. "Mrs. Barrow, perhaps." "I'm asking a straightforward question." Her voice rose just enough to carry to the next table. Whether by design or habit, Darius couldn't tell, and he understood it didn't matter which. This room is full of people who have spent their careers in defense, who have built things, who earned their seats through years of work and generations of service. A pause she let sit. "It's a fair question." "It is," Darius agreed. She blinked again. "West Point," he said. "Class of 1997. 2 tours in the Gulf. 1 at a forward operating base in the Midwest. Combat Action Badge, Bronze Star. 2 Purple Hearts. 28 years of commissioned service." He paused. "Is that the qualification you were asking about?" The room had gone quiet in their vicinity. Not the whole ballroom, their corner of it. Nearby tables had turned. Conversations had dropped, her jaw set. This wasn't going where she'd intended. He wasn't flustered, wasn't defensive, wasn't performing patience for anyone watching. He was sitting there, calm, attentive, looking at her the way you look at a document you're reading carefully, filing each line. She didn't know how to navigate calm. "My family," she said, "has served this country since. I know your family's history." "Then you understand what I'm saying. I understand exactly what you're saying." Deeper crack. Because he wasn't angry. That was the thing she couldn't find purchase on. She had walked over ready for argument or apology. She had answers prepared for both. What she had no answer for was a man who looked at her as if every word she said was data he was quietly collecting. She reached for her wine glass. Whether she'd planned to or not, the gesture was already in motion before she'd fully decided anything. Or maybe the deciding and the doing had collapsed into the same moment. She'd spent so long acting without consequence that the gap between intention and action had simply closed. "What I'm saying," she announced, loud enough now for the tables around them, "is that this room represents earned access, earned trust. And there are people here tonight receiving that access based on criteria that have nothing to do with merit. Nothing to do with what they've actually built or sacrificed or proven." Someone at an adjacent table made a small, pained sound. "And I think it's time," she continued, voice carrying first still, "that someone said what people in this room are actually thinking." Graham Barrow was pushing through the crowd now. Darius saw him from the edge of his vision, moving fast. Too far, too late. Mrs. Hayes's voice had dropped all social warmth. Flat and final. I suggest, Celeste said, that this man explain to everyone present exactly why he's sitting at this table." And Darius did the one thing she had not prepared for. He looked directly at her, and he waited. Not for her to continue. Not for someone to intervene. He looked at her with complete and patient attention, like she was the only person in the room. Like nothing she could say or do in the next 30 seconds was going to change a single fact about who he was or why he was there. That look undid something in her. The glass tilted. Red wine fell in a long, slow arc over his head, down the side of his face, soaking into the white collar of his shirt, spreading through the fabric of his jacket in a stain that every person within 20 feet could see and would not forget. The ballroom froze. Not a word, not a sound anywhere near them. Darius did not move. He sat absolutely still, hands flat on the table, spine straight, letting the wine trickle down to his jaw and drop onto the tablecloth below. 3 seconds. 4. 5. He reached it to his breast pocket, produced a folded white handkerchief, opened it slowly, and began with the same sacred precision he brought to everything to pat his face dry. 300 people held their collective breath. He looked up at Celeste. No anger, no theater, no performance of dignity for the cameras already appearing around the room. Just looked at her. "Thank you, Mrs. Barrow," he said, quiet enough that it landed only for her. "You just answered every question I came here with." He set the handkerchief on the table, folded it once, turned back to Colonel Hayes. "I think we can wrap up for the evening," he said, as though a minor administrative matter had just concluded. The Fairmont Hotel, lobby, parking structure, room 1407, 9 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. Celeste Barrow stood at the edge of the table. Empty glass still in her hand, arm still extended. The ballroom noise came back slowly, not the warm kind. The cold kind. The sound of 300 people processing something unexpected. Graham reached her side. He'd pushed through the crowd fast enough to arrive 30 seconds too late, which would become the defining fact of his night. Celeste. He said her name like a door closing. We need to go. She didn't move. She was watching Darius, who had turned away from her, who was speaking quietly to Hayes, who was acting with every element of his bearing, as if she had already receded into the background of an evening that contained more important things. Like she had never been the most important thing in that room, like she had, in fact, never been. Graham took her arm. Firmly this time. Phones were visible across the ballroom. Not all of them. Enough. In the lobby, 3 minutes later, Leon fell into step beside Darius. The general was moving toward the elevator with the unhurried certainty of a man who had somewhere to be. Sir. Leon kept his voice low. You have wine on, I know. Your jacket is, I know, Leon. A beat. How are you doing? Darius stopped walking. They stood near the elevator bank, marble floors, soft light. The gala muffled behind closed doors. He looked at Leon, and for a moment, just a moment, something crossed his face that had nothing to do with rank or composure. Something that was simply the face of a man who was tired, not broken, not defeated. Tired in the particular way of someone who has carried the same weight for a very long time and knows he'll carry it again tomorrow. I've been called worse, he said, by people with more power than she has. Leon nodded, said nothing. Schedule the 2 p.m. briefing for tomorrow, Darius said. Pentagon. Get Hayes on the line before 9. Full room, I want the DIU liaisons present and the Barrow contract file on the table. He started walking again. And get me a clean shirt. The elevator opened. He stepped in, alone for the first time since arriving. He let out a long, slow breath. Not grief, not anger, something older and less dramatic than either. He'd known before walking into that room that something like this was possible. He hadn't known about the glass, but he'd known the shape of it. Because the shape of it had followed him through 28 years of rooms, exactly like that one. He'd just stopped letting those rooms be right about him. Upstairs, in the parking structure, Graham helped Celeste into the car without speaking. She looked out the window. The adrenaline was settling. Something else settling with it. Something she wasn't naming yet. You need to call someone tonight, Graham said. Flat. Reading from an internal list. PR. Legal, someone who can get ahead of this. I don't need Celeste. Same tone. Same quality. There were cameras. There are always cameras, not like tonight. She turned back to the window. He was dismissive, she said. He was out of place and I was. I know what you were doing. A silence settled between them with the weight of 20 years of things neither of them had said. Graham started the car. Get some sleep, he said. We'll figure the rest out in the morning. He didn't believe that. He could hear it in his own voice, and he suspected she could too, because he'd seen Darius Holt's face in the 5 seconds after the wine hit. He'd seen the stillness, the handkerchief, the deliberate, unhurried self-possession of a man who knew exactly who he was and had decided in that moment that no one in the room was going to take that from him. Graham had spent 20 years in boardrooms and across negotiating tables. He knew what authority looked like when it wasn't working to prove itself. He drove out into the San Francisco rain. In room 1407, Darius sat on the edge of the bed in a clean t-shirt. The stained jacket folded over the chair, his phone face down on the nightstand. He wasn't looking at the notifications. Leon had texted 3 updates in the past 40 minutes. He'd read them in the morning. He was looking at a photograph. Old, grainy, scanned from a print at some point in the 90s. A young man in army dress uniform, 19 years old, standing outside a bus depot in Detroit with a duffel bag at his feet. Proud enough to fill the frame, his mother had taken it. She'd driven him to that bus stop without speaking for most of the ride. Not because she was angry. She was not a woman who turned her feelings into silence as punishment. She was quiet because she was holding something she didn't have words for yet. When he got out of the car, she said 3 things. Not goodbye, not be safe, not I love you, though all of those were also true. She said, you remember who you are. In every room, every single one. He set the phone down on the nightstand. He lay back on the bed. Outside, San Francisco kept moving. The rain kept falling. Somewhere across the city, 300 people were going home with a story they hadn't planned to carry. And somewhere in that same city, on platforms and feeds and group chats, a video was beginning to spread. Quietly at first. Then not quietly at all. Darius Holt closed his eyes. He remembered who he was. That was enough to sleep on. Room 1407, Ofekwa Hotel. 5 voice in. The phone started at 5:47, not with a call. With weight. The accumulated weight of 231 notifications pressing against the screen like something that needed to get out. Darius had turned the ringer off at 11. He'd slept anyway. He'd trained himself to sleep in conditions considerably worse than a hotel room with a difficult evening behind it. That was what 28 years did. It calibrated you. Taught your body that rest was not a reward for easy days. Rest was maintenance. You did it because tomorrow required it. He sat up, reached for the phone, read for 4 minutes without moving. Then he set it face down on the nightstand. Stood, walked to the window, San Francisco below him, still gray at the edges. The bay invisible, in the morning overcast. Cars moving on the streets in the ordinary way of a city that had not registered what happened in a ballroom on its north side 12 hours ago. Most of the city hadn't, but enough of it had, and enough in 2024 was all it took. He stood at the window for a while. Not processing grief, not managing anger. He'd done his processing in the elevator last night, in the 7 seconds of a long breath, and that had been sufficient. What he was doing now was something closer to calculation. Not cold calculation, the warm kind. The kind that asks, given everything that is true this morning, what does today actually require? He knew the answer before he finished the question. He went to shower, got dressed, ordered coffee from the hotel line, and waited for Leon to knock. Leon knocked at 6:15 3 times, measured. Leon always knocked like he was delivering a field report, which this morning he was. Darius opened the door. Leon stepped in, carrying 2 cups from the lobby cafe. He had the expression of a man who had been awake since 4 and had organized his concerns into a ranked list. It's everywhere, Leon said. I know, all the major platforms. The clip is running at 47 seconds on most feeds. There's a longer version at 2 minutes 12 that has the full exchange before the... He paused. Before. How many views on the short version? As of 20 minutes ago, 11 million. Darius accepted his coffee, looked at it, took a sip. There are already statements from 2 Barrow board members, Leon continued, expressing concern. Distancing from the incident without explicitly distancing from the company. So the language reads like it was written by someone who got a phone call at midnight and had 45 minutes to produce something, which is probably exactly what happened. Stock opened down 14%. Pre-market was indicating worse. Had Darius moved to the window again, held his coffee in both hands, looked at the city getting lighter. There's one more thing, Leon said. Something in the way he said it made Darius turn. Leon set his coffee on the desk, squared himself slightly, the way he did when he was about to say something he'd rather not say but understood was his job to say. Admiral Creighton called at 5 a.m. before I came up. A breath. He said, and I'm going to give you the exact words, he said. Barrow has friends on armed services. 2 of them senior. This gets political fast if we push it formally. Maybe we find a way to handle this that doesn't require a full hearing. Move forward. Let the incident speak for itself and let the contract decision be the consequence. The room went still. Darius looked at Leon for a long moment. Leon looked back, not flinching, but not comfortable either. What did you tell him? Darius said, that I would pass the message along, and now you've passed it along. Yes, sir. Darius turned back to the window, drank his coffee. Outside, a delivery truck turned onto the street below. A woman walked a dog past the hotel entrance. The city moved in its ordinary way. He thought about a question he'd asked himself many times over 28 years, in many different forms. The question always had the same shape. How long do you keep absorbing the cost of other people's comfort? He'd answered it differently at different points in his career. Early on, the answer was, as long as it takes to get to the next level, where you'll have enough standing to change something. Then it was, as long as the mission requires it. Then it was more complicated than either of those. This morning, the answer was simple. Get Colonel Hayes on the line before 9, he said. Pentagon at 2 p.m. Full room, DIU liaison, contracts division attorney, the secretary's office liaison, and the Barrow contract file on the table before I arrive. Leon picked up his coffee. Yes, sir, and Leon. Darius didn't turn from the window. Book me a commercial flight home tonight, coach. Not the government aircraft. A pause. Sir, I want 3 hours of sitting in a seat where nobody knows what I do. He finished his coffee. I find it clarifying. The Barrow residence, Pacific Heights, San Francisco, 3 a.m. to 7 a.m. While Darius slept in room 14027, Graham Barrow had been awake since 3. Not because something woke him, because he lay in bed at 2:58, staring at the ceiling, and understood that sleep was not going to happen, and stay horizontal was just a way of pretending otherwise. So he got up, went downstairs, sat at the kitchen island in the dark. He didn't turn the lights on. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because turning the lights on would have made it a decision to be awake, and he wasn't ready to decide anything yet. Not even something that small. His laptop was open in front of him. He'd pulled up the clip. Not the full 2-minute version, the 47-second one, the one moving fastest across every platform. He'd been watching the last 15 seconds on repeat. The handkerchief, the stillness. The 5 seconds where 300 people stopped breathing. The moment Darius Holt looked up at his wife. And then the turn. The way he turned back to the officials beside him and resumed the conversations as if the interruption had been minor and administrative. Graham had watched those 15 seconds 19 times. He told himself he was looking for something. A crack in the composure. Evidence that it was performance rather than character. Some small proof that underneath all that stillness was a man doing the same thing Graham had been doing for 20 years. Managing appearances, maintaining a surface, keeping things together through practiced will. There was no crack, which meant it wasn't performance, which meant that man had sat in a ballroom chair with wine running down his face in front of everyone and simply decided to be fully himself. Not the self the room expected, not the self that made the situation easier for anyone watching, just himself, without apology or theater. Graham closed the laptop. The kitchen was quiet. The house was quiet. Celeste was upstairs. He didn't know if she was sleeping. He hadn't gone back up to check. He opened the HR file on his tablet instead. He'd kept it on the tablet because something in him understood, even at the time of each settlement, that he might need to look at it again someday. That keeping it somewhere accessible was a form of not entirely burying it. A small, deniable act of honesty that he could point to internally as evidence that he hadn't completely looked away. It hadn't been enough. He knew that now, but he opened it anyway. 3 complaints, 18 months, 2 departments. He read through each summary slowly. Not skimming, the way you read something when you've stopped trying to make it mean less than it does. First complaint. A project manager, Arlene Webb, though the file used only initials in the summary Graham had approved, who documented being passed over for a promotion in favor of a less qualified colleague. Celeste had been involved in the conversation that preceded the decision. Settlement, $80,000. Confidentiality agreement, no personnel changes. No policy review. Second complaint. A senior engineer who reported a pattern of comments during site visits that Celeste occasionally attended. Comments that made his continued presence at those visits professionally untenable. Settlement, $110,000, same agreement. Nothing structural changed. Third complaint. A department head who submitted a formal report to HR describing a meeting in which Celeste referred to a new inclusion initiative as unnecessary social engineering for people who should already know how to conduct themselves. That one settled for $65,000. $255,000. That was the number. The total cost of Graham Barrow's chosen silence, expressed in wire transfers and non-disclosure agreements, and the quiet reassurance he'd given himself each time that isolated incidents were not the same as institutional failure. He'd signed every check. He sat with that number in the dark kitchen for a long time. He'd told himself each time it was a business decision, that the cost of a public dispute would exceed the cost of a private settlement, that Celeste didn't mean it the way they said. That people were too sensitive, that the company came first. He'd believed all of it, or he'd pretended to. And he sat in the dark now understanding, for the first time without the protection of an excuse, that believing something and pretending to believe it were not the same thing. and that he had known the difference all along. He picked up his phone, not to call a lawyer, not to call their PR firm, or anyone who could help him manage what was coming. He called the one person he owed the truth to before he owed it to anyone else. The phone rang 4 times. Congressman Everett Shaw picked up. "I've seen it," the old man said. No greeting, just those 3 words. Graham said nothing. "Come to the office at 9, Shaw said. "Bring whatever files are relevant, all of them." The line went dead. Graham set the phone down on the counter. He sat in the dark kitchen until the sky outside the window began to lighten. Gray first. Then the slow brightening of a city morning that has no interest in what happened to you the night before. By 7, when the room was light enough to see without the lamps, he finally stood, made fresh coffee, drank it standing at the counter. He thought about the decision he'd been circling since 3 a.m. The one that had been forming the whole time he was watching the clip and reading the file and doing arithmetic that kept coming out wrong no matter how he arranged the numbers. He thought about Celeste upstairs. 20 years. 20 years of knowing, of choosing the path that cost less in the short term and more in every other way, of signing checks that were really invoices for his silence, of watching a pattern develop and telling himself it wasn't a pattern. He set down his coffee cup, went upstairs, not to wake Celeste, to shower and put on a suit and go explain to his father-in-law how 20 years of since nothing had finally found its invoice. And on the way to the bathroom, passing the nightstand where his phone was charging, he stopped, picked up the phone, opened his contacts, scrolled to a name he hadn't called in 2 years, his attorney. Personal, not corporate. He stood in the dark hallway for a moment. Then he made the call. The attorney picked up on the 3rd ring, groggy but professional. "Graham, it's early. I know." A pause. "I need to start divorce proceedings, today if possible." A silence on the other end. Not surprised. "Just processing." "I'll have paperwork ready by this afternoon," the attorney said. "Thank you." He hung up, set the phone back on the nightstand, stood in the hallway for another moment, then went to shower. The decision didn't feel like relief. It didn't feel like grief either. It felt like the first honest thing he'd done in a very long time, which was, he supposed, its own kind of beginning. The Barrow residence and Sitsia, San Francisco. 8:34 a.m. to 1 p.m. Celeste slept until 8:34. That was the thing people would later find impossible to understand. And it was the most honest detail of everything that followed, which was perhaps why it never made it into any of the coverage. She slept until 8:34, because she had not at any point in the night experienced a crisis of conscience. She had experienced a dinner party that got difficult. She had experienced a man who refused to conduct himself appropriately, and a moment where she'd made her position end clear, perhaps more dramatically than intended, but clearly. And then she had come home and had a tense car ride with Graham and gone upstairs and fallen asleep, because she was not a person who lost sleep over doing what she believed was right. She came downstairs at 8:34 to find Graham gone, a note on the kitchen island that said only "call me," and her phone face down on the counter with a yellow sticky note over the screen that said, in Graham's handwriting, "Don't open this until you've called me." She peeled off the note, looked at the phone, put it down again, made coffee first, stood at the same counter where Graham had stood an hour earlier and drank half a cup, then picked up the phone. She looked at the notifications for approximately 40 seconds before she set it down again, then picked it up again, then set it down, then she sat on the stool, the one Graham had occupied at 3 in the morning with his HR file and his arithmetic of regret, and opened Instagram. Not to read the comments, to post. Because Celeste Berto had been in difficult social situations before, and she had learned over 48 years that the worst thing you could do in a difficult social situation was go quiet. Quiet looked like guilt. Quiet looked like retreat, and Celeste Barrow did not retreat. The post went up at 9:12. It read, "Standing in a room full of people who have spent their lives earning their place is not a privilege. It's a responsibility. Real qualifications matter. Real experience matters. I make no apologies for holding that standard. Some rooms exist for a reason. No image, just text, no hashtags. By 9:45, it had been screenshot and by 6 journalists. By 10:30, a producer from a nationally syndicated conservative podcast had her number and was calling it. She answered. The host's name was Barrett. He had the voice of a man who had spent 2 decades being professionally outraged and had built something profitable from it. "Mrs. Barrow," he said, "I want to make sure you get to tell your side of this. I appreciate that," she said. And she sat down at the kitchen table, where she'd had breakfast 10,000 times, and told the story of the previous evening the way she had experienced it. Not the way the 47-second clip told it, the way 300 witnesses described it, the way it felt from inside her own certainty. Which was, she explained, the only place she'd ever been able to operate from. The podcast aired at noon. By 12:30, the clip of her most memorable line had been posted separately across 4 platforms. "It was a mistake in delivery," she said, "not in principle." In a sedan, Leon played it through the car speakers at Darius's request. They listened. When it ended, Leon reached forward and turned it off. The car was quiet for a moment, Virginia rolling past the windows. Trees bare this time of year, the interstate full of the ordinary mid-morning traffic of people going places. "She's going to do more of these," Darius said. "She already has 2 more scheduled. One this afternoon with a regional TV outlet, one tomorrow morning with a digital channel." Leon checked his notes. "The digital channel has 3.2 million subscribers." Darius nodded once, turned back to the window. "And the stock? Down 17.5 at last check. The board? No official statement yet. But 2 members have issued personal statements expressing concern about the company's values and culture. One of them is General Barbara Weston, retired. She's on the board." Darius recognized the name. Barbara Weston had served 2 ranks below him on a joint readiness exercise 6 years ago. She was precise, principled, and did not issue statements expressing concern unless she'd already decided what to do about it. He looked back out the window. He thought about Graham Barrow in that car ride home, the silence between husband and wife that had the texture of something very old. He thought about the HR file he hadn't seen but knew existed. He thought about what it cost a man to sign a check that made a problem go away, and what it cost him in the accumulated interest of years. Some debts, Darius had learned, didn't stay in the accounts where you put them. They moved and they grew. And eventually they found you in a kitchen at 3 in the morning with a laptop open and nowhere left to look but directly at what you'd done. The Pentagon, room 4B, 2:04 p.m. The Pentagon had a particular quality of light at 2 in the afternoon on a weekday. Institutional, constant, the kind of light that had no interest in how you felt about being in it. Darius had always found that useful. He walked through security, nodded to staff at 2 separate checkpoints who recognized his face and checked his credentials anyway. That was protocol. He'd written part of that protocol himself. He respected it. Room 4B was a conference room used for sensitive procurement briefings. No windows, good acoustics, a table that seated 12, currently occupied by 5 people who stood when Darius entered. Colonel Patricia Hayes, 2 DIU officials, a liaison from the Office of the Secretary of Defense, a senior attorney from the Pentagon's Contracts Division. They sat when he sat. The Barrow defense contract file was on the table as requested. Graham Barrow was shown in at 2:04. He came alone, no attorney, no assistant, no advisor of any kind. He had come apparently by himself and by choice, which told Darius something, for the man opened his mouth. Graham walked in and stopped. He had expected a difficult meeting. He'd prepared himself for several versions of difficult on the drive over. What he had not prepared for was the specific version of Darius Holt sitting at the head of that table. Not because Darius was performing authority. He wasn't standing. His voice wasn't raised. He wasn't doing anything that announced itself. He was simply sitting in a perfectly pressed uniform with 28 years of service represented across his chest, and the absolute stillness of a man who had nothing left to prove to anyone in that room or outside it. The kind of stillness that isn't practiced, the kind that comes from knowing, at a level below thought, exactly who you are. Graham sat down, put both hands on the table. General Holt. His voice was steady, which cost him something. "I owe you a personal apology. What happened last night was Mr. Barrow." Darius's voice was level, not warm, not cold. Precise, the way a surgical instrument is precise. "I'd like you to hold that for a moment." Graham closed his mouth. "I want to make sure we both understand what this meeting is," Darius said. "This is not a conversation about last night's incident as an isolated event. What happened at the gala was clarifying. It accelerated a process. But it didn't create a problem that wasn't already present. He opened the contract file. Barrow Defense Systems has been on our shortlist for the UAV contract since March. Your technical specifications were the strongest we reviewed. Pricing was competitive. Your delivery record on previous contracts was solid, with 2 minor exceptions. A pause. We were going to recommend you, past tense. Both words landing where Darius intended. Graham's hand stayed flat on the table. But something in his shoulders changed. What shifted, Darius continued, was not the incident itself. What shifted was that the incident provided evidence that confirmed a pattern our assessment process had already begun to flag. He turned a page. 3 internal HR complaints in 18 months. 2 separate departments, settled without remediation. No structural changes. No personnel accountability. He looked up. I need you to understand, Mr. Barrow, that I know what those settlements represent. Not just what they cost, what they were designed to avoid. Graham said nothing. The silence was its own kind of testimony. We don't buy technology, Darius said. Quiet now. Even. The voice of someone explaining something that should be simple. We buy the people who build it. We buy their judgment, their values, their behavior under pressure. Because the systems your company produces end up in the hands of young soldiers operating them in conditions where the wrong decision costs lives. He paused. The culture those soldiers came from, the leadership that shaped that culture, it matters. It matters in ways that don't show up in a technical specification. Hayes placed a document at the center of the table. Graham looked at it. The UAV contract, Darius said, has been awarded to another contractor. The decision was finalized this morning. $1.4 billion. Gone. Graham looked at the document, at the other company's name at the top, at the date, at the signature line. He'd known it was coming. He'd known from the moment he stood in the ballroom, watching his wife and saw Darius's face in the seconds after the wine fell. He'd known it at 3 in the morning, with the HR file open on his tablet. He'd known it sitting across from his father-in-law at 9 a.m. and watching the old man read through documents without saying a word. He'd known. It still felt like the ground shifting under him. Furthermore, Hayes said, the Office of the Secretary of Defense has initiated a comprehensive review of all existing Barrow Defense contracts. Any contracts found to be associated with documented patterns of discriminatory institutional behavior may be subject to termination or non-renewal. Graham looked up. All existing contracts? All of them, Hayes confirmed. The room was quiet, except for the ventilation system running steadily in the ceiling. Graham looked at Darius, and Darius looked back with the expression of a man who took no pleasure in this, who was not performing justice, who was doing what the circumstances required, and would have preferred the circumstances to have been different. Is there anything, Graham said, that can be done for the company going forward? Darius considered the question honestly. Not for this contract, he said. That decision is made. He folded his hands on the table. But there are things you can do that will matter for what comes after. Not as performance, as actual change. He looked at Graham steadily. Remove your wife from any association with Barrow Defense. Every formal role, every informal representation, every event she attends as the company's face, complete removal. A pause. Implement a genuine remediation program. Not a statement on your website. Not a training afternoon. A structural program, external oversight, measurable outcomes, real accountability built into the process. Another pause, and issue a public statement that demonstrates you understand what happened and why. Not drafted by communications. Written by you, in your own words. Graham nodded slowly, not the quick nod of someone agreeing to get through a meeting. The slow nod of someone accepting weight. He stood, extended his hand across the table. Darius looked at it, stood. Shook it, not warmly, but honestly. I knew, Graham said. His voice carried the flat, factual quality of a deposition. About the complaints, about the pattern, about what my wife was capable of in rooms where she felt she had standing. I knew, and I made a choice, repeatedly, to say nothing. He held Darius's gaze. I don't have a justification for that. Darius held the handshake for a moment. No, he said. You don't. Graham walked out. The door closed. Hayes exhaled. She looked at Darius across the table. You didn't have to tell him what he could do going forward. That wasn't required by this process. No, Terry agreed. Why did you? Darius began gathering the documents on the table, closing the file. Because ending things is the easy part, he said. Anyone can end things. What actually costs something is space, what you're going to build in the space where the wrong thing used to be. He stood. And I'm more interested in what gets built than in what gets torn down. He picked up his jacket from the chair back. Put it on. Get me the commercial flight information from Leon, he said. I want to be on the ground before 9. Barrow Defense Systems Headquarters, San Francisco, 6 p.m. to 7:45 p.m. The board meeting was called by Congressman Everett Shaw. That fact alone told everyone who received the summons that something had changed at a fundamental level. Shaw had not been to the Barrow defense offices in 4 years. He'd stepped back from active involvement in the company when he handed operational control to Graham a decade ago, and he had, not in the intervening time, found reason to return. He found reason tonight. He arrived at 5:58, sat at the head of the table, folded his hands, said nothing until every seat was filled. 7 board members, Graham standing near the window, and Celeste, who had come directly from her second media appearance of the day, still in the blue blazer she'd chosen because it read as serious but approachable. She'd been, she believed, quite good on the regional television segment. She set her phone face down on the table with the ease of someone who had no reason to be bracing for anything. Everett Shaw looked at his daughter. He was 74 years old. He had the kind of face that had lived through enough to stop performing anything. Deep lines around the mouth. Gray eyes that had watched 4 decades of industry and 2 terms of Congress and 1 marriage and the raising of a daughter he was beginning to understand, looked at clearly enough. He slid a tablet across the table to Celeste. On the screen, her 9:12 a.m. Instagram post. She looked at it. Looked up. Daddy, I can explain what I was before you speak. His voice was quiet. Final. I want you to understand what I know. She waited. He had spoken with Colonel Hayes at 10 a.m. He knew about the UAV contract, $1.4 billion awarded this morning to a competitor. He knew about the comprehensive review of all existing Barrow contracts now underway. He knew about the stock, down 19% by close of trading. He knew because General Barbara Weston had called him at noon from her home in Virginia exactly who Darius Holt was, what his record contained, and what it meant that his was now attached to a viral video featuring Celeste and a wine glass. And he knew. Because Graham had sat in his office for 2 hours that morning with a tablet and a HR file and a number that added up to $255,000 of documented, paid for silence, that last night was not an aberration. Celeste listened to all of it. Her face moved through several versions of itself. I was protecting this family, she said when he finished. The first thing out of her mouth. The sentence she'd been ready with before he started. I was protecting what we built. What you built. What grandfather started. I was. You were protecting a feeling? Shaw said. She stopped. The feeling that you belong in rooms more than other people do, he said. That your presence in those rooms is more justified than theirs. That the history of this family confers something on you that other people have to earn. He looked at her without blinking. That feeling has never built a single thing. It has only ever cost things. That man had no right to. That man, Shaw said, is a decorated general who controls $48 billion in annual defense contracts. He came to that event to determine whether this company was run by people he could trust with the systems that protect American soldiers. He paused. And you answered his question very thoroughly. General Weston spoke from the far end of the table. Retired 3 years ago. Still carried herself like she was in the field. When she spoke in a room, people with considerably more nominal authority tended to go quiet. I served under General Holt, she said. 6 years ago. Joint exercise. He was a colonel. I watched him walk into a room of 20 senior officers, most of them skeptical. All of them watching to see what he'd do and command that room inside of 10 minutes. She looked at Celeste strictly, not by outranking anyone, not by performing confidence, by being exactly who he was and refusing to be anything less. She paused. What you did last night is the thing that has been done to men like him throughout his entire career. The difference is that this time everyone saw it happen. Celeste looked around the table. These were people she had known for years. Some for decades, family, long-term colleagues, people who had sat at dinner tables in her home and attended her charity events and accepted her calls. All of them were looking at her now with the particular expression of people who have been waiting for a version of this conversation for a long time and are relieved and ashamed in equal measure that it has finally arrived. Shaw spoke again, formal now, the voice he used when something was being made official. By the authority of this board, you are removed from all roles, formal, informal, representative, or advisory, associated with Babro defense systems. Effective immediately. Celeste's face went still. The family trust is frozen pending a full legal and financial review of the impact of last night's events and today's market losses. Daddy, I am not finished. She closed her mouth. Graham has initiated divorce proceedings, Shaw said. The papers will be served tomorrow morning. Celeste looked at Graham, across the room, standing by the window with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face carrying the expression of a man who has made a decision he should have made years ago and is living, simultaneously, with the relief of it and the cost of it. She looked at him for a long time. He didn't look away. But he didn't speak, and she understood in that silence that she was not looking at a new silence. She was looking at the same silence that had lived in their house for most of their marriage. The silence that had said, I see what you are, and I am choosing, for reasons of my own, not to say so. The silence that had made room, year after year, for everything that had happened. The silence that had been, in its own way, a participant in all of it. The meeting ended at 7:40. People filed out in ones and twos. Nobody stopped to speak to Celeste. They were not cruel about it. They simply moved around her, the way water moves around something that has stopped in a current. Her phone lit up on the table. Another request. Another platform that wanted her voice and her position and her certainty. She looked at it, picked it up, put it down without answering. She sat at the table alone after the room emptied, the city visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. San Francisco at 7:45 on a November evening, doing what cities do, indifferent and continuous and not remotely concerned with what had just been decided in a conference room on the 32nd floor. She sat for a long time, and for the first time since 9:12 that morning, she did not reach for her phone to explain herself. She just sat in the quiet, doing the same arithmetic that Graham had done in a dark kitchen at 3 in the morning, coming up slowly with the same answer. Washington 6 weeks later, November, 6 weeks passed, not quietly. Nothing about those 6 weeks was quiet, but they passed the way hard things pass. One day at a time, sometimes 1 hour, sometimes just the next 10 minutes and then the 10 after that, until enough of them had accumulated to constitute something you could call forward motion. The hashtag moved on. The news cycle found new material. 3 other scandals arrived, burned bright, and faded in the time it took the Barrow story to settle from active outrage into something more permanent and less loud. The kind of story that doesn't trend anymore, but doesn't disappear either. The kind that gets cited, referenced, used as shorthand for something larger. The consequences, though, the real ones, those didn't move on. Those were just beginning to show their full shape. The Senate Armed Services Subcommittee met on a Tuesday in the 3rd week of November. Room 22 of the Russell Senate Office Building. High ceilings, dark wood paneling, worn smooth by decades of important people saying important things and occasionally meaning them. Darius Holt sat at the witness table alone. Leon was in the back row. Protocol placed the witness at the table without support staff, which was fine. Darius had never needed company to sit in a room. 6 senators on the raised days, 4 he knew well. 2 he was about to know better. The subcommittee had been convened, in official language, to review the Defense Innovation Unit's procurement assessment methodology. Whether existing evaluation frameworks were sufficient, whether new guidelines were warranted. Standard legislative language, that meant something had happened, and Congress needed to decide whether to address it or contain it. 2 of the 6 senators had received, in the past 4 years, a combined $600,000 in campaign contributions from defense contractors with ties to the Barrow family's network. This was publicly available information. Darius had read it on the flight from San Francisco 6 weeks ago and had not forgotten it. He sat with his hands folded on the table, spine straight, face composed, the same posture he'd maintained in a ballroom chair with wine running down his jaw. The same posture he'd maintained in combat briefings and congressional hearings, and every room in between that had tried, by its arrangement of chairs and its distribution of authority, to communicate to him where he sat in the order of things. Senator Aldridge opened, Alabama, 63 years old, the practiced authority of a man who had spent decades in rooms where his word was the last one. General Holt. He said the title, the way certain people say the word allegedly, with just enough space around it to suggest it might be provisional. Thank you for appearing today. Of course, Senator, let me be direct. Aldridge leaned forward. There are those who believe the events of 6 weeks ago at the Fairmont Hotel were orchestrated. Darius looked at him. Orchestrated, he said, not a question. Just the word. Returned to the room where it had been released. That a senior procurement official deliberately arranged circumstances designed to. Senator, Darius's voice was level, the kind of level that stops things without ousing itself. Are you asking whether I poured wine on myself? A sound moved through the gallery, not quite a laugh. Something in the direction of one. Aldridge's jaw tightened. I'm asking whether the circumstances of that evening were engineered to produce a predetermined outcome. I arrived at a charity event as a private citizen, Darius said. I sat at the table to which I had been assigned. I was approached by another guest. I answered the question she put me. He paused. Then I was assaulted. He let that word land where it needed to land. I did not design or anticipate any part of that sequence. But you did not identify yourself. I was under no obligation to. You were conducting what you've described as a character assessment. That is accurate, without the knowledge of the party being assessed. Also accurate. Darius unfolded his hands, placed them flat on the table. Senator, when we evaluate a contractor's technical specifications, we review the documentation they submit. When we evaluate their institutional character, how their leadership treats people, what culture they've built, what values actually operate inside their organization rather than what their website claims, that assessment looks different. He paused. You don't learn who people are by announcing you're watching. Aldridge drew breath. Darius continued. Not fast. Steady. Barrow Defense Systems was our strongest technical candidate. Their specification was excellent. Their pricing was fair. Their delivery history was solid. We were prepared to recommend them for a contract worth $1.4 billion. He paused. But we were about to trust them with systems operated by American soldiers in conditions that demand sound judgment and the ability to treat every person in the chain of command with basic human dignity. He looked at Aldridge. What occurred that evening provided information directly relevant to that assessment. I used it. Senator Weston, Maryland, 68, the second face Darius had noted before the hearing, spoke next. Her voice was more measured than Aldridge's, more careful. The voice of someone who had thought about how this should go. General Holt. Nobody in this room disputes that what Mrs. Barrow did was wrong. Thank you, Senator. But the for this subcommittee committee concerns your process. Whether a senior official conducting an unofficial assessment without disclosure creates problems of transparency and... May I ask the subcommittee a question? A pause. Weston blinked. I'm sorry, I'd like to ask the subcommittee a question, if that's permitted. A brief commotion on the dais. Not hostile. Surprised. Witnesses answered questions. Senators asked them. That was the established arrangement of this particular room. Chairman Beaumont, Virginia 71, who had been largely silent and watchful through the opening exchanges, leaned into his microphone. Go ahead, General. Darius looked at the dais, at all 6 of them, slowly. The way you look at something you want to understand completely before you respond to it. I enlisted in the United States Army at 18 years old, he said. I completed basic training. I did what the service required of me. I earned my commission through performance in the field. I served for 28 years. I received a Bronze Star and 2 Purple Hearts. He paused. Not for effect, for breath. The breath of someone who has carried something a long way and is setting it down carefully. In those 28 years, I have been passed over for promotions I was qualified for via the standard. I have been assisted subordinates who questioned my authority before I finished my first sentence to them. I have walked into rooms. Rooms that looked very much like this one, where the people on the other side of the table made their assessment of me before I opened my mouth. Nobody on the dais moved. Not once, he said, not twice, as a consistent feature of my professional environment. Not an exception, a pattern. He let that sit in the room for a moment. I am not telling you this for sympathy, he continued. I am telling you this because it is directly relevant to the question of process that this subcommittee has convened to examine. He looked at Weston, then Aldridge, then Beaumont. The assessment process I employed that evening is identical to the process that has been applied to men who look like me in rooms like this for the entirety of my career. The process of deciding who belongs before they've spoken. The process of requiring certain people to prove what others are simply assumed to have. He paused, one beat. I applied that process in reverse for one evening, and now we're here. The room held a silence that had texture to it. Then Darius said the sentence that would appear in 2 law school case studies and a congressional research report over the following 3 years. How many times does a man have to prove he belongs before the question stops being asked, not raised? Not dramatic, just the question, plain and aimed, and landing in the specific silence of a room full of people who had each, in their individual ways, been part of maintaining the answer. Chairman Beaumont sat back, looked at Aldridge, who was looking at his notes, looked at Weston, who was looking at her hands. Then he leaned forward into his microphone. I think, he said, choosing his words with visible care, we may be ready to move to the reform proposal. The investigation was suspended 11 days after the hearing. No disciplinary action, no formal finding against Darius or his office. The subcommittee issued a 3-paragraph statement in the careful language of institutions that are not quite admitting they were wrong, but are no longer prepared to argue they were right. It acknowledged that the DIU's assessment processes merited review and that new guidelines would be developed in the coming fiscal year. Between those 3 paragraphs, if you knew how to read them, was a sentence that said, "We looked at this man's record, and we could not find the purchase we needed." Darius received the news by email at 8:15 on a Wednesday morning. He read it at his desk, set it aside, picked up the next item in his inbox. Leon knocked and entered without waiting, which was the signal between them for something that couldn't hold. You saw it, Leon said. I saw it. How are you feeling? Darius set his coffee down, looked at Leon across the desk. I have a 9 o'clock that needs prep and 70 other things before noon, he said. How are you feeling? Leon almost smiled. The almost was enough. Like the right thing happened, he said. Get me the 9 o'clock file. Leon moved to get it, then stopped at the door. Sir, for what it's worth, he turned back. I've worked for 4 generals. You're the only one I've seen sit in a room the way you sat in that ballroom. He paused. I just wanted to say that. Darius looked at him for a moment. Get the file, Leon. Yes, sir. The 9 o'clock file appeared on his desk. He opened it. The meeting happened. The 17 other things happened. The day moved forward in the ordinary way of days that contain important work and no particular ceremony. At 2 in the afternoon, his personal cell phone rang. Area code 313, Detroit. He picked up on the second ring. Baby, his mother's voice, 76 years old and still the voice that cut through everything else cleanly, the way a note played in tune cuts through noise. Hey, mamas, I saw the news this morning. I figured. They dropped it. They did. A pause. The kind she specialized in. The kind that held more than most people fit into sentences. Are you okay? She said. And there it was. Not how did it go. Not congratulations. Not I told you this would work out, though she'd believed that from the start. She was not a woman who collected on being right. She asked, Are you okay? Darius sat back in his chair. He let a long breath go. Not the managed kind, the real kind. I've been better, he said, and I've been worse. That's not an answer. No, a beat. I'm okay, Mama. I'm okay. They called Junzals on television. I know. That woman stood up in front of all those people, and she. I know. And you just sat there. I sat there. She was quiet for a moment. He could hear her kitchen in the background. The acoustic of that kitchen. 30 years of the sciences, the same floor, the same window over the sink that looked out at the neighbor's oak tree. He'd grown up doing homework at that table, eaten 10,000 meals in that room. Your grandfather used to say, she started, then stopped, started again. He said dignity isn't something anybody gives you. It's something you decide. Her voice went quiet the way it did when she was saying something she'd been holding for a while. I think you decided that a long time ago, Darius, before I could have taught it to you. You just came in knowing. He didn't say anything, because there was nothing to add to that. Nothing that would improve it or make it more true than it already was. Come home sometime, she said. More than 2 days. I will. I'll believe that when I see it. I know you will. I love you. I love you, Mama. He sat with the phone in his hand for a moment after she hung up. Then he put it in his pocket, straightened his jacket, and went back to work. Piedmont Veterans Support Center, Atlanta, Georgia. October through February. Celeste Barrow stood in the parking lot of the Piedmont Veterans Support Center on a Tuesday morning in October and looked at the entrance for a long time before she went in. She'd driven herself. The older car, the one she'd rarely used when there was a driver available, which there no longer was. She'd found it in the garage of the Pacific Heights house during the 2 weeks she'd been permitted to collect her belongings, and she'd driven it to Atlanta because she needed to go somewhere that wasn't San Francisco. And Atlanta was where her college roommate lived, and her college roommate was the only person who had called without an agenda. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building in Midtown, no doorman, a buzzer system that sometimes worked. She'd signed a 6-month lease with a portion of what remained after the legal proceedings had taken their portion, and she'd moved in with less than she'd owned at 23. The Piedmont Center was the court-designated placement for her 200 hours of community service. The judge had been specific about the organization, not a general charity. This one, which served, among other populations, a significant number of black veterans and their families navigating housing, employment, and benefits systems that were supposed to help them, and sometimes did and sometimes fell well short of that. The judge had not explained his specificity. He hadn't needed to. She went inside. Earl Prudhomme was at the front desk. He was 53 years old. He'd served 19 years in the Army and lost his right arm below the elbow in a training accident at Fort Benning when he was 31. Not combat, which somehow made it harder to explain to people who had already decided what kind of story they were about to hear. He ran the Piedmont Center's reintegration program, had for 11 years. Before that, he'd been a client of this same organization. Before that, he'd been sleeping in his truck in a parking structure near the airport, because the VA waitlist for transitional housing ran 4 months long, and he had nowhere else to go. He knew the distance between those 2 points precisely. He'd walked every mile of it. He looked up when Celeste came through the door. She looked at him. A moment passed between them that contained everything they already knew about each other and required no elaboration. Then Earl picked up a clipboard and held it across the counter. "Barrow?" he said. "Yes. Sign in. Date it. Write your start time." He set the clipboard down in front of her. "When you're done, there's a backlog of 47 intake files in the room at the end of the hall. They need to be alphabetized and entered into the database. Instructions are on the chair. The system was slow. Don't let that stop you." Celeste looked at him. "That's it," she said. "That's it." She waited a moment. "No orientation. Files are alphabetized by last name." Earl turned back to his desk. "You know the alphabet?" "Yes." "Then you're oriented." He sat down and went back to what he'd been doing. Celeste stood at the counter for a moment. Then she signed the clipboard, wrote the date and the time, walked to the room at the end of the hall, found the files, found the instructions on the chair, sat down, and started. The first 4 weeks were like that. Files and database entry, intake call coverage when the desk ran short, making copies, sorting gradient, ordering supplies from a standing list. Nothing that required her name, or her connections, or the particular skills she'd spent 48 years assuming were considerable. Nothing that positioned her anywhere. Just work. Necessary and ongoing and entirely indifferent to who she was outside of it. She made mistakes. The database crashed twice because she'd entered records in the wrong fields and corrupted sequences. Earl showed her how to reverse it both times without sighing, which she found harder to absorb than if he'd shown visible frustration. Frustration she knew how to respond to. This quiet, instructional patience was different. She was late once. Week 3. Traffic on the 285. She explained this to Earl when she came in. He looked at her. "The people we serve don't get to be late because of traffic." She was not late again. She met people. Not because she sought them out. She wasn't ready for that yet, and she understood she wasn't. But because they were there, in the waiting area, in the hallways, in the program rooms when she was delivering files or covering the desk. A man named Clarence, who came every Thursday for the employment workshop. Former staff sergeant, 61 years old. Trying to move into civilian logistic work and feeling that 19 years of Army logistics experience translated imperfectly into hiring decisions made by people who didn't know how to read a military resume. A woman named Diane, who was 34, had served 2 tours, was raising 3 children by herself, and was trying to get her GI Bill enrollment processed before the January deadline in a system that seemed designed to make straightforward things complicated. A young man, 23, Celeste guessed, though he could have been younger, named Tobias, who came in twice a week and mostly sat in the corner of the day room and didn't speak much. Earl seemed to know him well enough to leave him alone and watch from the periphery, which Celeste slowly understood was its own form of attention. She filed their intake forms, entered their records into the database, learned their names in the process. She'd spent 48 years sorting people into categories that determined how much attention they deserved. It was harder to do that to someone whose intake form you'd typed yourself. The morning in week 5 that shifted something happened without announcement. A Tuesday, cold for Atlanta in early November. Celeste was at the front desk because the Tuesday volunteer hadn't come in, and Earl was running the morning group and there was no one else. An older man came through the door, 70, maybe older, dark coat, moving carefully. The kind of careful that means the body has renegotiated its relationship with time and mind has learned to work within the new terms. He stood at the counter. "I need help with a letter," he said, "from the VA. They sent me something about my benefits, and I can't make sense of what they want from me." He produced the letter from his coat pocket, folded into quarters. She took it, read it, benefits reassessment notice. Routine audit, but the response instructions were dense, and the deadline was 8 days out, and a missed response from automatic suspension pending further review. She'd seen this letter before, or near enough to it, 6 times in the past 5 weeks, entering records for other clients. She pulled up the response template, opened his file, walked him through each field, filled in his answers as he gave them, printed the completed form, had him sign it, told him the certified mail address and explained why certified mattered. 22 minutes. When they finished, the man looked at the signed letter in his hand. "Young lady," he said. He was looking at the letter, not at her. "I've been trying to sort this out for going on 3 weeks. 3 different offices. Nobody could explain it plain to me." She didn't say anything. "Thank you." He looked up. "I mean that sincerely." He folded the letter back into quarters, returned it to his coat pocket, walked out through the glass front doors into the parking lot and to his car. Celeste watched him go. Then she sat very still at the front desk for a while. Not crying. She wasn't crying. Something smaller than that. Something that didn't have a name she'd used before. A feeling with no performance attached to it. No audience, no reflection in anyone else's response to her. Just a small, quiet thing that had nothing to do with her at all. Earl came up from the back hallway. He stopped when he saw her face. Read it the way he read most things, quickly and without comment. "What happened?" he said. "A man needed help with his benefits notice." She turned back to the computer. "I helped him." Earl looked at her for a moment. "Okay," he said, and went back to work. But she felt touching after that. Not with suspicion. With the particular patience of someone who has seen people at the beginning of something and learned to give the process room. The weeks continued. October became November. November moved toward December. The 200 court-mandated hours accumulated and finished. Susek kept coming in. The promotion ceremony was in December. 4 stars. Darius had known it was coming. You don't not know when the signals are there. Conversations that shift slightly, scheduling adjustments. The way certain people begin addressing you in meetings with a formality that anticipates something official. He'd read the signals and said nothing to anyone outside of Leon, who already knew because Leon already knew. But knowing doesn't prepare you for standing in the room where it happens. The ceremony was at the Pentagon. Small by the standards of these things. 40 people, the Secretary of Defense, senior officials from the DIU and Joint Chiefs, 2 former commanding officers who had flown in. Leon in the front row working very hard at an expression of professional composure and not entirely succeeding. His mother was beside Leon, 76 years old, the Navy coat, the one she wore for the occasions that mattered, his commissioning, his Bronze Star presentation, and now this. She'd flown in from Detroit the previous afternoon. He'd offered to arrange a car from the airport. She'd taken the shuttle because she was, as she had always been, exactly who she was, regardless of what was available. She watched him cross the room to receive the 4th star. She did not cry openly. She pressed her lips together in the way he'd seen exactly once before, at a bus depot in Detroit 33 years ago, when he was 18 years old with a duffel bag at his feet and a future he couldn't see the shape of yet. The same expression, across 33 years, as if some feelings don't change their form, no matter how much time passes around them. After the ceremony in the hallway, she put her hands on either side of his face. She looked at him. Not at the stars, not at the uniform, at him. Your grandfather would have. She stopped. I know, Mama. He would have stood up so straight his back would have hurt for a week. Darius almost smiled. She let go of his face, straightened his jacket the way she'd straightened his school uniform 40 years ago, by instinct and habit and the persistence of love that doesn't change its form just because the person inside it has grown. She looked at the Navy coat on her own shoulders. 3 times, she said, this coat has been to 3 things. The coat has good judgment, he said. She pressed her lips together again, but the corners moved, just slightly. They stood in the hallway together for a while, without needing to say anything else, which was the most comfortable kind of company there is. In January, the Cultural Integrity Assessment Framework went before the Full Armed Services Committee. Darius had spent 3 months developing it with a working group that included procurement officers, employment law specialists, civil rights researchers, and, quietly off the formal record, several contractors who had been through the existing assessment process and found it insufficient in ways they hadn't known how to articulate until someone gave them a structure to work from. The framework required any defense contractor seeking a contract above $250 million to complete a 2-year institutional culture review. Not a questionnaire, not a diversity statement on a website. A review with teeth. External auditors, employee interviews conducted independently, leadership assessments, pay equity analysis, documented remediation timelines with accountability checkpoints and real consequences for non-completion. It was not a perfect document. Darius knew that. He'd said so in the working group sessions. What this document was, real, specific, built to be harder to perform your way through than to actually do. The committee debated for 6 hours. Voted 11-4 in favor, signed into regulation 2 weeks after that. Leon texted at 9 p.m. the evening of the signing. It passed. Darius was at his desk finishing a briefing document. He read the text, set the phone down, picked it up, typed, I know, Leon. How does it feel? He thought about the honest answer, typed like the beginning of something, not the end. He set the phone down, finished the briefing document, turned off his desk lamp, sat in the quiet office for a moment before standing up. He thought about room 4B, about Graham Barrow's hands flat on the table, about a ballroom in San Francisco and a glass that tilted and 5 seconds of absolute silence. He thought about what he'd said to Hayes after Graham left. Ending things is the easy part. What costs something is deciding what you build in the space where the wrong thing used to be. He stood up, put on his jacket, and drove home in the dark toward whatever came next. 9 months after the framework was signed, the Piedmont Center held its annual gala. Celeste had been there nearly a year by then. The court hours finished in February. Earl offered her 12 paid hours a week the same month, at the front desk, between 2 other items on his list. Grant administration is backed up. You want 12 hours? Yes, that was how it happened. The months accumulated. Clarence got a logistics job in March, stopped in the doorway to tell her, you didn't have to spend that time. I know, she said. Diane's GI Bill went through with 4 days to spare after Celeste tracked down a misfiled document. Diane sent a handwritten card. Celeste kept it. Tobias started speaking in the Thursday workshop in April. Earl asked what felt hardest about coming back. Tobias said, nobody tells you what to do with your hands. Celeste wrote it down, just because she didn't want to forget it. Darius was a keynote speaker at the September gala, 4 stars by then. When he learned 2 weeks out that Celeste had been working there since October, he sat with that for a moment, then did nothing with it. Because there was nothing to do. Celeste found out the morning of the event, thought about rearranging her assignment to the kitchen, thought about calling in, then thought about Clarence, about Diane's card, about Tobias and his hands, and stayed. At 7:40, she was in the service corridor when Darius came around the corner. Both stopped, narrow hallway, fluorescent light, the noise of the event behind closed doors. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. He looked at her. A moment passed. "I know," he said. She understood something she'd been arriving at for 11 months. He had walked into the Fairmont already whole. She was the one with missing pieces, and those pieces didn't come from him. They came from Clarence, from Diane, from Tobias, from choosing every Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday to show up and be useful rather than important. "I heard you've been here every week," he said. "I have. It's not enough," she said. "No," Darius said. "But keep going." He moved past her. She picked up the next tray and went back to work, not because she'd been forgiven, because it was what the evening required, and because she had finally learned the difference. 1 year after the Fairmont, Darius at his desk, 4th star in the early light, reading the first implementation report, 63 contractors reviewed, 41 had documented disparities they'd never recorded before. Leon came in. "Do you think it holds after you move on?" The people who went through those reviews are different. Some of them. And the ones who aren't, they have a record now. It's not everything. "No," Darius said. "Let's go. We're late." Graham in a smaller office on a lower floor, view of a parking structure. 12 people across the table, mid-year results on the screen. He was listening, the kind that leaves marks. The company was smaller. 2 contracts reinstated. He stood in the hallway after and thought about room 4B, about I knew, and said nothing. The meaning had gotten heavier, not lighter. He went back to work. Celeste on a Saturday morning. A woman came through the door, uncertain, work clothes. "Is this the employment workshop?" "It is. Grab a seat. Are you a veteran?" "No, I made serious mistakes. This is how I'm learning to be useful." Earl appeared in the doorway, looked at the room, at Celeste, said nothing, but something was in his face that hadn't been there a year ago. Not approval, recognition, a small nod. She gave one back, went to get more folders. Her mother came in December, slept on the second-hand couch without mentioning it. Looked around the apartment. "You look different." "I am, not just the externals." A pause. "I'm proud of you. Not of what happened, but of this." "Then I should have said something years ago. I was wrong." "Okay," Celeste said. Simply. "Okay." They sat together without talking, which was, between the two of them, everything. The wine dried. The headlines moved on. Darius carried the proof that dignity holds. Graham carried the weight of what silence costs. Celeste carried the slow, unglamorous work of becoming someone she could live with. No audience, no credit, just the work that mattered to the people on the other side of it. Somewhere in those ordinary days, she stopped needing the room to recognize her. A character is not what you claim to have. It's what you do when you think it doesn't matter, when the room is empty, when no one important is watching, when the only measure left is the whole self do.